In 1890, this root was served in the finest restaurants across Europe and America. Chefs called it vegetable oyster because when cooked, it tasted exactly like fresh seafood from the ocean. It grew in poor soil where nothing else survived. It needed no fertilizer, no pesticides, no irrigation. Plant it once, and it came back year after year, feeding families for generations. The Victorians considered it essential. Seed catalogues dedicated entire pages to its varieties. And then, somewhere between 1920 and 1950, it began disappearing. First from markets, then from gardens, then from memory itself. Today, most people have never heard its name. They have never tasted it. They do not know it exists. This is the story of salsify, the oyster root. And this is how the modern food system erased it. Let us start with what salsify actually is. It belongs to the sunflower family. It produces a long, slender, cream-colored root that looks similar to a parsnip, but thinner. The plant itself, unassuming. It grows tall grass-like leaves and eventually produces a purple flower that opens in the morning and closes by afternoon. But the magic is underground. That root, when harvested and cooked, transforms into something unexpected. The flavor is delicate, creamy, and remarkably similar to oysters. Some say it tastes like artichoke hearts mixed with the sea. Others describe it as the closest a vegetable can come to shellfish without actually being shellfish. This is not marketing. This is not exaggeration. For centuries, people who could not afford oysters or who lived far from the ocean would grow salsify instead. They called it the oyster plant, the vegetable oyster, poor man's oyster. These names stuck because the comparison was accurate. When sautéed in butter, when added to soups, when battered and fried, salsify delivered a taste that genuinely resembled the expensive delicacy from the sea. The history of salsify stretches back further than most vegetables we eat today. It originated in the Mediterranean region and was cultivated by the ancient Greeks and Romans. Pliny the Elder mentioned it in his writings. By the Middle Ages, it had spread across Europe as both a food and a folk remedy. Monasteries grew it in their gardens. Peasant farmers planted it along fence rows and in marginal land that could not support other crops. And this is where salsify becomes remarkable. It thrives in conditions that would destroy most vegetables. Sandy soil, rocky soil, clay soil, drought, frost, neglect. Salsify does not care. Its long taproot reaches deep into the earth, pulling up nutrients and moisture that shallow-rooted plants cannot access. It survives winters that kill other crops. In fact, many gardeners claimed that salsify tasted better after a frost, as the cold converted some of its starches into sugars. By the 1800s, salsify had become a staple across Europe and North America. Victorian cookbooks featured it prominently. Mrs. Beeton's famous Book of Household Management included multiple salsify recipes. American seed catalogues from the late 1800s offered several varieties. Mammoth Sandwich Island became the most popular cultivar, prized for its thick roots and mild flavor. Gardeners grew it not as a curiosity, but as a practical, reliable food source. The appeal was obvious. You planted it in spring. You ignored it all summer. You harvested it in fall or even winter, digging up roots as needed. Whatever you left in the ground continued growing the following year. The plant was effectively perennial in practice. One planting could provide food for years if managed correctly. For families with limited resources, limited land, or limited time, salsify was perfect. It asked for almost nothing and gave back abundance. But salsify offered more than convenience and flavor. It contained something that modern nutrition science would later recognize as extraordinarily valuable: inulin. This is a type of fiber that humans cannot digest directly. Instead, it passes through the stomach and small intestine intact, arriving in the large intestine where it feeds beneficial bacteria. These bacteria ferment the inulin and produce compounds that support gut health. Salsify contains one of the highest concentrations of inulin found in any vegetable, higher than chicory in some analyses, higher than Jerusalem artichoke, higher than any common vegetable you would find in a modern grocery store. This matters because gut bacteria influence far more than digestion. Research over the past 2 decades has connected the gut microbiome to immune function, mood regulation, inflammation levels, and metabolic health. The bacteria living in your intestines require fiber to survive. Not just any fiber, but specific types like inulin that they can actually use. When they get this fiber, they thrive. When they do not, they decline. Modern diets, heavy in processed foods and refined carbohydrates, often starve these beneficial bacteria. Salsify, eaten regularly, would have provided exactly what they needed. The Victorians did not know about inulin or the microbiome, but they knew that salsify was good for digestion. They knew that people who ate it regularly seemed healthier. They incorporated it into their diets not because of scientific studies, but because of accumulated practical wisdom passed down through generations. So what happened? How did a vegetable this useful, this delicious, this resilient, become almost completely unknown? The answer lies not in any single decision, but in a series of shifts that transformed agriculture and food distribution during the 20th century. First, consider storage. Salsify roots are delicate once harvested. They dry out quickly. They do not store well in warehouses or survive long truck journeys. Unlike potatoes or carrots, which can sit in cold storage for months, salsify needs to be eaten relatively fresh or left in the ground until needed. This made it unsuitable for the emerging industrial food system that required vegetables to travel long distances and wait on shelves. Second, consider appearance. Salsify roots are thin, irregular, and often branched. They do not look uniform. They do not stack neatly in displays. Supermarkets, which began replacing local markets in the mid-20th century, wanted vegetables that looked consistent and appealing. Salsify, with its hairy skin and odd shapes, did not fit the aesthetic that retailers demanded. Third, consider processing. The modern food industry profits most from vegetables that can be transformed into shelf-stable products. Canned goods, frozen packages, dried mixes. Salsify resists this processing. Its delicate flavor diminishes when canned. Its texture suffers when frozen. It offers no obvious path to value-added products that corporations could brand, market, and sell at premium prices. Fourth, consider mechanization. As farms grew larger and more mechanized, they favored crops that machines could plant, tend, and harvest efficiently. Salsify, with its long, fragile roots that break easily when pulled from the ground, required careful hand harvesting. This made it economically uncompetitive compared to crops that tractors and combines could handle. Fifth, consider seeds. Unlike hybrid varieties that farmers must purchase new each year, salsify produces seeds that gardeners can save and replant indefinitely. This made it unprofitable for seed companies focused on selling proprietary hybrids. There was no money in promoting a plant that reproduced itself freely and needed no corporate involvement to perpetuate. None of this was conspiracy. No secret meeting decided to eliminate salsify. Instead, the logic of industrial agriculture simply filtered it out. The system rewarded certain traits: shelf stability, uniform appearance, processing potential, mechanical harvestability, seed dependency. Salsify possessed none of these, so it faded. Seed catalogs dropped it. Grocery stores never stocked it. cookbooks stopped featuring it. Within 2 generations, a vegetable that had fed families for centuries became a curiosity that almost no one recognized. The erasure was so complete that most people today have never encountered the word salsify. If they see it at a farmer's market, they walk past without recognition. If they find seeds online, they assume it must be exotic or difficult. The cultural knowledge that once surrounded this plant, the recipes, the growing techniques, the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest, has nearly vanished. But salsify itself has not vanished. It still grows. It still produces those remarkable roots. It still tastes like oysters when prepared properly. It still contains that gut-nourishing inulin. It still thrives in poor soil and cold weather. The plant has not changed. Only our awareness of it has disappeared. And this is where the story becomes relevant to the present moment. We live in an era of rising food costs, depleted soils, uncertain climate, and widespread digestive problems linked to processed diets. We spend money on probiotic supplements while ignoring the prebiotic fibers that actually feed our gut bacteria. We worry about food security while overlooking resilient crops that grow without inputs. We search for sustainable alternatives while forgetting that our ancestors already found them. Salsify is not a miracle solution to these problems, but it represents something important. It represents agricultural knowledge that the industrial system discarded because it did not fit the profit model. It represents nutrition that cannot be bottled and sold. It represents food sovereignty, the ability to grow something valuable without depending on corporations for seeds, fertilizers, or pesticides. Growing salsify today is not difficult. Seeds remain available from specialty suppliers and seed libraries. The plant requires minimal care. Direct sow in spring. Thindi, seedlings. Wait. Harvest in fall or leave roots in the ground through winter for spring harvest. The cold improves the flavor. The roots store best right where they grew, in the soil, until you need them. Preparing salsify requires some adjustment for modern cooks unfamiliar with the vegetable. The roots should be scrubbed and peeled. They oxidize quickly when cut, turning brown like apples, so dropping them in water with a splash of lemon juice helps maintain color. From there, the options multiply. Roast them with olive oil and herbs, simmer them in cream sauce, mash them like potatoes, add them to soups and stews, batter and fry them like oyster fritters. Each method reveals that distinctive flavor that made Victorian chefs treasure this root. The experience of eating salsify is unlike any other vegetable. That oceanic hint is subtle, but unmistakable. The texture is creamy when cooked properly. The satisfaction is deeper than you might expect from a simple root. This is food that connects you to something older than industrial agriculture, something that worked for centuries before anyone decided it was not profitable enough to continue. There are dozens of vegetables like salsify, forgotten, abandoned, erased from common knowledge not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well without corporate involvement. They grew too easily. They reproduced too freely. They required too little purchasing. The system had no place for them. But you have a place for them. Your garden has a place for them. Your kitchen has a place for them. Your memory can hold what the market chose to forget. Salsify still exists. It still grows. It still waits for someone to remember. The seeds are out there. The knowledge is recoverable. The flavor is exactly as remarkable as your great-great-grandparents knew it to be. All that remains is for you to plant what they tried to make you forget. If this changed how you think about food, about history, about what has been hidden in plain sight, subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning. There are hundreds of forgotten foods waiting to be rediscovered, and I am going to show you all of them. Subscribe now, and I will see you in the next one.